Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me on this live webinar today. I'm going to be talking about how to communicate the value of marketing internally. This is a live webinar, so there's going to be an opportunity for questions, and I would love your input. I'm going to throw up some polls as we go through this content, so I really want you to be involved in today's session. So just in case you haven't been on any of our webinars in the past, just a very quick introduction to myself. My name is Will. I'm the managing director here at Webbox. I founded the agency back in 2008, and we've worked with large FTSE 100 organizations, all the way down to a startup. And actually, it's the difference which kind of excites me, and I love the kind of variation day to day. What I love what I love doing day to day is actually working with businesses to help them define their requirements, to shape what a website solution or a digital marketing campaign might look like, and then obviously seeing that through and seeing the impact it has on our clients' businesses. But over that time, clearly I've come across marketing teams who feel maybe a little bit undervalued internally, or maybe struggle to get their point across internally, or even struggle to justify budget recommendations. And it's really after having those conversations with marketing teams has brought me to this topic today, and hopefully I can share some things with you that will be useful. Now, just so you're aware, we are recording today's session, so I will share a copy of that recording with you later this week. Please also keep the chat open. I'd love you to submit your questions throughout this session, and then I'll leave an opportunity at the end to go through them. This is a CPD accredited webinar. So if you are currently doing CPD and kind of getting points towards that, I'll give you some information towards the end to satisfy that. And then, as always, we love your feedback on our sessions. Please keep sending it in. If there's any feedback you've got, then we'd love to hear it. Or even if there's a topic you would like us to cover, then again, please share that with us. Now, let's just start this session by setting the scene. So, the core problem as I see it is marketing is often seen as a cost to the business. And really, what we want to do today is reposition it as an investment in that business, an investment in growing that business and growing the brand awareness of that business. So that's something we see time and time again. Maybe you can resonate with that internally. Or alternatively, sometimes the reporting mechanisms just don't connect with the business. So maybe you're sharing reports internally at the moment, but they're just not landing with the teams that you're sharing it with. So hopefully I can give you some advice on that and how to adapt your reports in this session. Maybe we've got a little bit too much emphasis on the activity, not the impact. So we're really busy day to day. We're writing blog posts, sending emails, making sure our social media channels are up to date. And we're so engrossed in the day-to-day activity that maybe we lose sight of the bigger picture and the overall marketing objectives of the business. And then the other problem we see is maybe data isn't trusted. So you're reporting on this number of conversions or clicks or impressions or form fills, phone number dials, but the numbers just don't land because there's a distrust with whether they're actually accurate or not. So this is some of the things that we see, and hopefully you kind of resonate with some of those. So in this session today, I'm going to cover these points. So each one builds upon the previous one. So I want to start with square one. How do we align marketing with business goals and then build trust in your data? Then how do we turn reporting into real insight and actually position marketing as a growth lever within the business? And then part of it is also how do we communicate that effectively with stakeholders And then the final piece, and I got to be honest, this is my favorite, is how do we then demonstrate continuous improvement or progress through conversion rate optimization so that the business sees that things are moving forward at all times. So that is the plan. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll feel a bit more confident with having these internal conversations and driving the business forward and them seeing the value in the marketing team. So, first up, it's the foundational point of aligning with business goals. So, before we talk about tracking, reporting, performance, and so on, we need to start in a slightly different place, and that's actually the business itself. So, one of the most common reasons marketing struggles to demonstrate value internally is because it's not always clear what it is trying to align with the business objectives and what the business is trying to achieve. So marketing teams can be really busy running campaigns, generating traffic, organizing events, sending artwork to print and producing content. But if that activity isn't directly linked to business priorities, it becomes really difficult to justify. So the starting point is to step back and ask some simple questions, but really important ones. So what are the business's key objectives over the next 6 to 12 months? And actually ask yourself, do you even know those? Are they focused on growth, profitability, entering new markets, or improving retention? And what are the sales targets? And where is that kind of pressure coming from? And I think once you understand that, marketing becomes much clearer. You know, your role is not just to do marketing, but to support those objectives in a measurable way. So this is also where success needs to be clearly defined. Not in marketing terms like clicks or impressions, but in outcomes that the business actually cares about. So that might be leads, revenue, bookings, or customer acquisition. Now, when you start here, everything else becomes much easier. Your reporting has context, your activity has purpose, and your conversations internally become far more commercial and relevant. So, this is where I'd encourage a little bit of honest reflection. So, in many cases, the gap isn't capability, it's alignment. So marketing teams are really good at doing work, getting stuff done, but they haven't fully connected with the commercial side of the business. So let's ask ourselves a few questions. Do you know what the key sales objectives are for the year ahead? Not just broadly, but specifically. You know, what targets need to be hit and what does success look like from a commercial perspective? Do you understand how marketing feeds into that? So, for example, how many leads are needed to hit those targets and what role your channels play in generating them? And importantly, are you comfortable with the financial side of the business? So that might include understanding revenue targets, margins, or even being able to read and interpret a basic profit and loss statement. Now, you don't need to become a financial expert. I'm not, suggesting that for a minute, but actually having a broad awareness just changes the way that you communicate internally. It allows you to frame marketing as part of a bigger picture rather than something that just sits separately to the business objectives. Now, when marketing is aligned with business goals, everything becomes more straightforward. And we've seen that through working with our clients closely. You know, your activity has a clear purpose because it's tied to something the business is actively trying to achieve. So you're no longer running campaigns in isolation, you're contributing to a wider plan. Now, your reporting also becomes more meaningful. So instead of presenting metrics in a vacuum, you can show how performance is tracking against specific goals. So that context makes a huge difference in how results are perceived. Just take a little minute to think about that in your own context. You might be reporting at the moment on how many leads maybe were generated from a campaign in the previous month. But sometimes without a barometer or a specific KPI, it's a little bit meaningless. How does that actually relate to the target of leads for that particular period? How does it compare year on year and so on? And what are you actually doing to move the dial? So just, yeah, think about this in your own context. Now, it also improves your conversations with the leadership team. So you're speaking their language, referencing the same objectives, and focusing on outcomes that actually matter to them. And that builds credibility and trust really quickly. And ultimately, it does strengthen your case for investment because when marketing is clearly linked to growth, revenue, or efficiency, it's much easier to justify budget, resource, and future activity. And this is why starting with alignment is so important. It sets the foundation for everything else that we're going to cover today. So let's move on from this first point. Let's have a look at how do we then build trust in the data that you're presenting. So once you're clear on what the business is trying to achieve, the next step is making sure you can actually measure it properly, because this is where things often start to fall down. You might be aligned with the business's goals, you might be running the right activity, but if the data you're using is the data you're using to report on performance just isn't trusted, it becomes really difficult to prove value. And this isn't always obvious. It's often not said directly, but you'll see it when questions come back to you. Things like, oh, does that include X? Or are we sure that's accurate? Or that seems really high. What that means is there's a lack of confidence in the data that you're presenting. And in many cases, this comes down to how tracking has been set up. There might be some gaps in conversion tracking, maybe inconsistencies between platforms, or a disconnect between marketing data and what's actually happening in the business, particularly in sales or inquiry volume. So the goal here is really simple. You want to be able to present your numbers with confidence, knowing that they reflect reality as closely as possible. And obviously, I appreciate the little caveat that sometimes we can't always track things, but that's why we were saying as closely as possible. Once the business trusts your data, the conversation changes, right? You move away from questioning the numbers and towards understanding what they mean and what actions to take. And you wouldn't believe the number of times we've uncovered inaccurate tracking or even double tracking in some of our digital audits. So it is worth ensuring this is set up correctly. I remember so many conversations over the years where people are really happy with their metrics. And then when you point out you're tracking every conversion twice, the conversation very quickly changes. Don't underestimate that actually this is often an issue in businesses. So I just want to get your thoughts at this point. I'm just going to pause and launch a poll. So, I want to ask you the question, how confident are you in the accuracy of your marketing data? So I'm going to launch a very quick poll. I'd love you to get involved. So on your screen now should pop up this poll. And yeah, the responses are very confident, fairly confident, not very confident, and not sure. So I'd love you to get involved and share your thoughts here. Okay, lots of responses coming in. Okay, most of you have submitted an answer. 30 seconds longer if you want to submit, you can. And I will actually share the results with you. It's quite an interesting result so far. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, hopefully everyone's responded. Um, Let me end that and I'm going to share the results with you because this is really interesting. Okay, 49% of you are fairly confident, 44% not very confident, and 8% not sure. What's really interesting here is not one person on today's webinar has actually said they are very confident and we trust our data fully. So what does that say? Let's be really honest about this. If not one person is really confident, and you really trust the data that you're presenting, then maybe it needs to start with us in the marketing team. We need to be really confident that our tracking is as bulletproof as possible before we go presenting these numbers to a senior leadership team or to the board or to our marketing director or whoever that might be. So just a little challenge for us there, just to think a little bit about um, tracking and building confidence in the numbers. Can I just say a big thank you actually for getting involved in that? It's really, really insightful to see what you're thinking on that point. So as we look at this point, building trust in your data, it is worth breaking this down into what good actually looks like in practice. So, at a basic level, you need clear tracking of the actions that matter most to your business. So, that could be form submissions, phone calls, bookings, inquiries, purchases, and so on. These should be consistently tracked across your website and campaigns so you're not missing anything important. From there, you want to understand where those conversions are coming from. So, not just total numbers, but which channel or campaign or source are actually moving the needle, driving the performance. And then this gives you a much clearer view of what's working and where to focus your efforts. And actually, if you want to take this up another level, you want to see specifically which campaigns and channels are part of the conversion process. Because I was only speaking to some clients recently where we were talking about a conversion taking 5, 6, or 7 touch points. So understanding that actually, your blog, your social media channels, your PPC campaign, attending an event, all might play a part in someone then going on to convert or make an inquiry. So it's really important that we understand the particular stepping stones involved in the journey and the impact they have on the final inquiry. But the real step forward here comes when you connect this to what happens after the lead is generated. So, for example, which leads turn into actual sales, revenue, or long term customers? That usually means linking your marketing data with your CRM or an internal system. And while that's not always perfect, even partial visibility here can significantly improve the quality of your reporting. Now, at that point, you're no longer just talking about marketing performance, you're talking about outcomes that the wider business recognizes and values. Now, it's also helpful to recognize where things commonly go wrong, because many of these issues will be familiar to us, I'm sure. A big one is missing or incomplete conversion tracking. So, for example, tracking form submissions but not phone calls, or tracking some campaigns but not others. That just creates gaps in your data and it makes it really difficult to get a full picture. Another issue is disconnected platforms. So, your website analytics, ad platforms, your CRM might just be telling different stories. And without joining these up, it's really hard to know what is working and ultimately what data to trust. Now, there's also a tendency to rely too heavily on a single tool, and that's often Google Analytics. And we might just say to the business, Google Analytics is our source of truth. And while it's valuable, it doesn't always capture the full journey end to end, especially when it comes to offline activity or sales outcomes. And finally, many organizations stop at the lead. They know how many inquiries they've generated, but not what happens next. And without that visibility, it's really difficult to link marketing activity to real business impact. And these are the kind of issues that quietly undermine confidence in your reporting, even if the numbers themselves look positive. So, if we're going to get this right, the impact is noticeable. Okay, so your internal conversations become much more confident because you're not second guessing the data, you're just presenting it. And you're able to stand behind the numbers and explain what they mean. It also then results in decision making becoming much faster. So when stakeholders trust the data, they're more comfortable acting on it, whether that's increasing a budget or changing direction or testing new ideas, they're far more comfortable in that environment. It also builds credibility for marketing as a function within the business. You're seen as a data-led, reliable, team within the business, and you're aligned with the business objectives rather than just reporting on marketing activity. And importantly, it gives you a strong foundation for everything that follows. Because once the data is trusted, you can start to focus on insight, optimization, and impact, which is exactly what we're going to look at next. So let's move on from reporting. Let's have a little look at turning this into insight. So once you've got data you can trust, the next step is how you actually communicate it. And this is where many marketers unintentionally fall short. A lot of reporting focuses on presenting metrics, traffic, impressions, clicks, conversions, and so on. And while all those numbers are important on their own, they don't tell a complete story. So for most stakeholders, especially those outside of the marketing realm, a dashboard full of numbers can be overwhelming or unclear. They can see what's happened, but they don't necessarily understand why it's happened or what it means for the business. And that's where insight comes in. Your role isn't just to report data, it's to interpret it, to explain what's driving performance, what's changed, and what the implications are. Because ultimately, stakeholders aren't looking for more data, they're looking for clarity and direction. They want to know whether things are working and what should happen next. Now, a really simple way to approach this is using this framework. So every time you report on performance, try to answer three questions. First up, what happened? So this is your data, the headline numbers, the trends, the changes compared to previous months, previous years, and so on. So this is like looking back. Second up, why did it happen? And this is immediately where most people fall short. This is where some insight has to come in. What kind of drove that activity? And if you can break it down by channel or by campaign, change in budget, seasonality, then all the better. Okay, but you need to bring some insight as to why did this happen. Third up, what should we do next? So this is the most important part as far as I'm concerned, because you need to learn from the data and move forward. So based on what you've seen, what action are you recommending? Should you invest more in a channel? Should you adjust the messaging because it's not resonating, or test something completely new? Okay. And when you when you structure your reporting in this way, it becomes much more useful to the business. You're not just sharing information, you're helping guide decisions. So even if you leave with nothing else today, try and structure your reporting into these three sections. Now, the real goal here is to move from data to decisions. So if your reporting doesn't lead to a conversation about what to do next, it's probably not doing its job. This is where you can really add value as a marketer. Two people can look at the same data, but the one who can interpret it clearly and confidently will have far more influence within the business. It's also important to highlight both opportunities and risks, not just what's working well, because often as marketers, we like to dwell there, but also what are the challenges? Is a particular campaign or channel just not working? Is the message or offer not resonating? Honestly, this balanced view builds credibility and trust within the business. And again, it comes back to action. Every key insight should lead somewhere. It might be a recommendation, a test, or a change in approach, but there should always be a next step because that's what the stakeholders are ultimately looking for. They're not looking for a summary of performance, but actually guidance on how to move things forward. So we're now reporting with some clarity and direction, but how do we show that performance is actually improving over time? Well, that's where we position marketing as this growth driver. So we focused on alignment and tracking and insight. Now we want to start thinking about how marketing is perceived within the business because perception matters, right? So in most organizations, marketing is still viewed as a cost, something that requires a budget but doesn't always clearly demonstrate a return. And I'm sure some of you can resonate with that. But when that's the case, it's often one of the first areas to be questioned or first budgets to be reduced when there's pressure on spend. So the shift we're aiming for is to reposition marketing as a growth lever. Now, this means moving away from talking about activity, campaigns, channels, but instead focusing on outcomes. What has marketing actually contributed to the business? Has it generated leads, increased revenue, improved efficiency, supported growth, increased brand awareness in a meaningful way? When you consistently connect marketing activity to these outcomes, the conversation completely changes. It becomes less about what marketing costs and more about what it delivers. Now, a big part of what this comes down to is how do we communicate the results? Now, the same data can be interpreted very differently depending on how it's presented. So, for example, you might say in an internal meeting, oh, we spent £10,000 on paid media. Immediately, this frames marketing as a cost. But actually, if we reframe it saying, we generated 30,000 in pipeline from a £10,000 investment in paid media, completely changes the picture. Now, this is not about spinning the numbers or overclaiming anything. This is about choosing to lead with impact rather than activity. And the same applies more broadly. Instead of focusing on channels like SEO, PPC, social, and so on, focus on what these channels are contributing to the business. Are they driving inquiries? Are they supporting revenue growth? Are they improving efficiency? Are they driving greater brand awareness? Make sure we're really clear on what each channel is doing within the pipeline. Now, this shift in narrative might seem really small, but it has a significant impact on how marketing is perceived internally. And when you consistently position marketing in this way, you start to see a shift in internal conversations. Budget discussions become far easier because you're no longer just asking for spend, you're making a case for investment based on an expected return. Your credibility with the leadership team also increases because you're speaking in terms of outcomes, and they understand that. They care about that. And when we can demonstrate a clear link between marketing and business performance, the road just becomes much smoother. And over time, this does help marketing take a more strategic role within the business. You're not just delivering campaigns, but you're contributing to growth and helping shape direction. Now, that ultimately is where you want to be. Marketing as a function It needs to be seen as something which is driving success for the business, not like a support function on the kind of fringe of the business. And even when you're doing this well, how to communicate it internally still makes a difference. So the business might really understand that it is driving huge value, but the way we communicate that does make a difference. So that's why we're going to move a little bit forward to focus on that topic. And again, I want to get your thoughts. So just before I jump into some kind of content here, I'd love to ask you this question. So, how do you currently report marketing performance internally? So I'm just going to launch this second poll. Um, Let me just grab this one. Okay, so that should come up on your screen now. So the question is, how do you currently report marketing performance internally? We've got some options on screen here. So we share one standard report with everyone. We slightly tailor reports depending on the recipient. We create specific reports or narratives for different stakeholders. And then fourth, we don't have a consistent reporting approach. So yeah, if you could select one of those options that you feel is most appropriate for you, and then I'll again share those results with you. Okay, most people have voted. 10 seconds and I'll bring it to a close. Okay, great. Fantastic. So let me end the poll now. I will share the results with you and we'll go through it together. So, really interesting once again. So, 28% of people saying that they share one standard report with everyone. I'll be honest, this is the most common approach that we tend to see. 23% slightly tailor reports depending on the recipient. Again, we've seen that time and time again. 8% creating specific reports or narratives for different stakeholders. Really interesting. They get the gold star. I got to be honest. That is, ultimately what you're aiming for here. And then, yeah, 43% don't have a consistent reporting approach. Okay, great. Thank you so much for getting involved in that. But again, I think that just highlights what we're talking about here. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that now. So, out of all the things that I'm talking about today, this is one of the biggest opportunities that I see. So, even if you're aligned with the business goals, you've got really strong data, you're generating real results, there's still one thing that can hold you back, and it's how we communicate effectively to different stakeholders within the business. So, one of the biggest mistakes we see is just treating all stakeholders the same. And in terms of the poll today, that's ultimately just sending out one report to everyone within the business. Now, there's sometimes good reason for that, so I'm not putting it down. But often, what this does is it brings confusion because it might land with some stakeholders and actually just cause confusion with others. Now, let's be honest, different people within your business will care about different things. Okay, so they've got different priorities, different pressures, different levels of understanding when it comes to marketing. So, sending out the same report with the same level of detail and the same messaging to everyone rarely lands well. And what's far more effective is tailoring your communication, not changing the data itself, absolutely not, but adjusting how you present it and what you focus on and how you explain it. Because ultimately, the goal isn't just to share information, it's to make sure that information is understood, valued, and acted upon. So, to make this more concrete, it helps to think about some typical roles within a business. Okay. So, a CFO is usually focused, of course, on financial performance. So, they're thinking about the return on investment, cost efficiency, and where the spend is delivering value. They don't need to deep dive into channels, they need real clarity on the outcomes. Whereas If you look at a typical CEO, they're focused on the bigger picture. So growth, direction, and overall performance. So they want to understand whether marketing is contributing to the trajectory of the business. Now, another persona would be the marketing director or head of marketing. And this person's going to likely care about the detail. So they want the channel performance, the testing, the optimization, how different activities are working together, and so on. They want the detail. Okay. Now, the key point is that the same underlying performance can be communicated in different ways depending on who you're speaking to. And actually, if you get this right, your reporting becomes much more effective because your message just lands really clearly. Now, you might be thinking, oh gosh, Will, I've got to produce 2 or 3 reports now every month. Of course, there's a way to automate this. Of course, there's a way to do this without it creating days of additional work for you. And we can talk about that another time. But landing on the desk of one of these personas, a report that is relevant to them does allow you to communicate more effectively. There's also a few simple ways to make your reporting more effective across the board. So these are just some broad recommendations, right? So first up, make it clear and focused. It's really tempting to include everything, but actually too much information dilutes the message. So you need to focus on what really matters. I'm sure we can all chuckle to ourselves of reports that we've seen over the years where they're like 20 pages long, full of graphs and tables and different stats. And it's just overwhelming. You don't know what to look at. And I'm not saying there's no place for that, but in actually a lot of scenarios, it's just information overload. Second up, lead with the most important insight. Don't make stakeholders search on page 14 for the key takeaway. Okay, be clear about that on page 1 in terms of what we want to draw their attention to. Third up, use visuals. Okay, no one likes looking through a long report of heavy and dense text. Okay, or even just overwhelming numbers of charts. Okay, we've really got to think about how the report looks visually because that is how we're going to digest it. And then also, finally, always link this back to business impact. If you're going to present a report to me and it's all about impressions, clicks, and so on, in my head, I'm just going to say, well, that's all vanity metrics. Okay. I need to understand how this links back to business impact. And when we're presenting that, what does the business care about? So it cares about, growth, revenue, so on. Then if we present it in that way, again, it lands far much better. Now, when you combine all of these elements, your reporting is much more than just like a monthly update or a weekly update. It becomes a tool for understanding and decision making. And that's really what we want to do here. So now we're aligned, hopefully, on measuring properly, reporting clearly, and communicating effectively. How do we want to show progress and improvement? And this is where we move on to one of my favorite points. So this is demonstrating progress through CRO. So up to this point, we've been thinking about, reporting, communication, and so on. And all of these things have a huge impact on demonstrating the value of marketing internally. But this piece is about showing continuous improvement. Because one of the challenges with marketing is that it can sometimes feel inconsistent. Campaigns go up and down, performance fluctuates, and it can be difficult to show a clear sense of momentum. And this is where conversion rate optimization really becomes valuable. So instead of just focusing on driving more traffic or launching new campaigns, including more channels into the mix, CRO is about improving what you've already got. So looking at how users interact with your website or your landing page, identifying where there's friction and making changes that improve performance. That might be simplifying a form, improving messaging, refining a user journey, or testing different layouts. But the key point is that you're not standing still. You're actively working to improve performance over time, and that's something you can clearly demonstrate. Now, CRO is really powerful because it changes the way your results are perceived. So rather than relying on big spikes from a campaign, you're showing consistent and incremental improvements. That might be increasing conversion rates month by month. So you've got the same traffic coming to your site, but the number of people that take an action continues to increase. Or it could be improving engagement, getting people to interact with the content, or reducing drop-offs at key stages in the journey. Now, it also makes your marketing more efficient because you're getting more value from the traffic that you're already generating. So this is something every business can relate to and often wants to hear because you're talking about efficiency, not just driving more at the top of the funnel. And importantly, these improvements are measurable because you can show before and after comparisons, you can test results and give clear evidence of what's working. And that gives you something really concrete to talk about internally, not just activity, but progress. So if we step back and look at the full picture here, this is how you move from activity to impact. It starts with aligning marketing to what the business is trying to achieve. From there, you put the right tracking in place so you can measure performance with confidence. You then start to turn your data into insight so it's clear what's happening and what it means. You position marketing as a driver of growth, by focusing on outcomes, not just activity. You then clearly communicate to different stakeholders, making sure your message lands. And finally, you demonstrate ongoing progress through continuous improvement. And when all of these pieces come together, marketing becomes much more easy to justify internally. It's no longer seen as a cost center or a question mark, but as a function that is clearly contributing to the success of the business. Now, we've gone through a lot today. I appreciate there's lots of areas that we've covered. And I hope that you've started to recognize a few areas in your own setup that could be improved. That might be around tracking not being as robust as it could be, reporting that doesn't always land with stakeholders, or simply just not having the time or clarity to focus on continuous improvement. And let's be honest, that's normal, right? This is a normal place to be. And a lot of organizations don't have all of this fully joined up. There are often gaps between data, reporting, and performance, and that's usually where the biggest opportunities sit. So if that kind of sounds familiar, that's exactly where we can help. So at Webbox, we do support organizations across tracking, reporting, and continuous improvement, helping bring all of these areas together so that marketing performance is clearer, more measurable, and easier to communicate internally. So if it would just be useful to have a discovery call where we take a look at your current setup and talk through how things can be strengthened, then just to start the process, you can scan that QR code and arrange that discovery call with myself. And importantly, as part of that discovery call, I want to share with you an idea of how you can enhance your reporting so you can communicate performance more clearly and confidently within your business. So I'll share exactly how to do that on that call. Now, the aim of this is to give you something practical and valuable to take away. So as I say, you can scan that QR code to arrange that initial call, or I will send over a link with a recording, hopefully tomorrow or later in the week. So everything we've covered today ultimately comes down to this, okay? Marketing value isn't just about what you do, it's about how clearly you can communicate the impact of that within your organization. And when you're aligned with the business, you're working with data you can trust, you're turning that data into insight and communicating it in a way that resonates with your stakeholders, the perception of marketing starts to shift. It becomes more than just an activity, it actually becomes a growth lever. And that's where you move from simply delivering marketing to being seen as a strategic department within the business. So I hope that content's been really helpful for you today. As you'll be aware, we do run regular educational webinars. So I'd love you to join our next season. This is actually the last topic within this season of webinars. So please follow us on Eventbrite to be the first to hear about our new topics when they're released. So I'm going to take a breather. I'd love you to pop some questions in the chat. If anything has resonated with you today, or if you want some clarity on a specific point, then please feel free to pop a message in the chat. You can do that as a direct message to me or just a message to everyone. And I'll open up my chat window and take a little look. Okay, so let's have a look here. Okay, so I've had a question come in direct, so let me just answer that first. I'll read it out so everyone can hear it. So this topic has really resonated with me because my director certainly thinks that marketing is just a cost to the business. We also have a sales team in the business. How can I help bring sales and marketing together so that my director sees the value across both of the teams? Okay, that is a really good question. I think just first up to say that, yeah, sales and marketing are different things. So I don't need to get confused today by me thinking that I'm positioning marketing as sales. Okay, they are different functions within the business. But marketing has to take some responsibility for the top of the funnel, as I call it. So driving the awareness and banging the drum for the business so that the leads come in. So, in terms of how the two teams work more closely, I think ultimately, if you're using a CRM, so let's just say HubSpot or Salesforce or something, I think you can start to bring the CRM data into your marketing reports to join the two functions together. So marketing tends to report on top of the funnel metrics, clicks, engagement, downloads, inquiries, and so on. But if you can join the dots, you can then start to report on the outcome. So how many of those leads went on to become a deal, as they call it, within a CRM? And then how many of those deals actually turned into a new customer? So if we can kind of join the dots there, I think both teams can work more closely because the sales team can feed back to you on what's working. Was the lead quality good or not, and so on. And actually, if the two teams can meet, maybe on a fortnightly basis to kind of check in, I think that's always a good thing as well. Great. So yeah, thank you for your question. Um, okay, let's have a look here. So from Victoria. Great. Okay, yeah, thanks, Victoria. Really appreciate your feedback. Yeah, glad it's resonated with you, as I'm sure it is for lots of marketers today. Okay, great. Question from Emma. Our biggest struggle is getting valuable feedback from the sales team. Any tips on encouraging this insight? Okay. Um, Great question, because I think we shouldn't focus on just, generating the leads and then think our job is done, because there's an element of lead quality that we're also responsible for as marketers. Now, of course, we can only be so responsible. I'm not saying everything falls within the marketing team, but if the lead quality is always poor, then we need to be doing something differently to adjust that. Okay. So I think we do need that feedback loop from the sales team. So similar to the previous question, actually, whether that is maybe arranging a fortnightly meeting to check in with the sales team, or whether that's maybe the marketing team having access to the sales team's CRM, because you could then start to look for yourself as to kind of which leads are progressing. Either one of those or even both would be ideal so that you can start to have a more joined up approach. But I think coming back to my point about communication, maybe a meeting with the sales team to talk about the importance of a joined up approach would be an initial starting point because actually you need to almost kind of say, look, can you help me help you and have that conversation? So the feedback going back to marketing is really important. So yeah, a couple of things that I would do in that instance. Okay, great. If there's any other questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll keep the chat open just for 10 more seconds, just in case anyone's midway typing. Um, Okay, great. Got one here from Marie. So, how do you meaningfully measure an awareness campaign without simply referencing reach? Yes, this is a real difficult one. I think if you are running a campaign which is about awareness, two things I'd probably say on this point. The first is aligning the expectations. So understanding or helping the organization understand, should I say, that this is an awareness campaign. So we're not tracking, number of leads off the back of this. We are tracking awareness. And actually, that's often done in reach. So metrics like impressions often come into this. The other aspect of this is this actually contributing to greater brand awareness? And you can do that by reporting on brand terms or brand searches over time. So are more people searching your brand term, over time? Obviously, this is not going to happen overnight. So you might want to run this report with a long date range. Because if over the months and if over the years, more and more people are just going straight to a search engine or an LLM and putting in your brand name, then you could take that as a fairly good indicator that the brand awareness campaigns are having an impact. Okay, because more people are just coming straight to you. So, yeah, first up, align expectations. We don't want the business thinking we're going to generate loads of leads off the back of this campaign. Let's be really clear to the business that it's about awareness. And secondly, let's measure awareness, and that can be done. Okay, great. Lovely. So yeah, Faye. Oh, sorry. Let me just open up Q&A as well. 2 seconds. Thanks, Faye. Appreciate you flagging that. So I'll read this one out. Our business development team doesn't use a CRM and prefers to keep everything in spreadsheets. In marketing, we use HubSpot, but we lose visibility on what happens to leads. How can we manage this? Do you know what? I've come across, both marketing and sales teams who are using spreadsheets, and in some instances, I can understand why, but I really feel like things have got to move on from there. Managing everything in a spreadsheet is just not efficient. I know this firsthand, and we work with a lot of businesses and we see lots of different team setups. I think a move away from spreadsheets to a CRM would be the kind of thing that I would recommend. But of course, Faye, how you kind of communicate that to the team is an important one. I think you would probably have to get buy-in from the powers that be, so kind of senior leadership team, that actually, if the sales team could use a CRM and ideally HubSpot, it would be the same one that you're using, then marketing can become more effective and efficient. And you can start to outline the reasons for that. And I think if the business sees the tangible impact that this change would have, it would probably be more inclined to encourage the sales team off spreadsheets. For me, it's a real kind of no-go, right? Because there's a couple of things that you need to start automating. So as an example, if you're I'm making an assumption here, but if you're running a PPC campaign as an example, if people are converting and kind of dropping off as a customer, you should be feeding this data back into Google Ads to signal to Google that actually that lead turned into a customer. So when you're looking for similar, personas, that's the right one, right? So you can talk to the business about the effectiveness of joining all these things together, and it just can't be done as effectively in a spreadsheet. So that's how I would position it, and really try and push the sales team away from spreadsheets. Of course, if you're already subscribing to HubSpot as well, it doesn't cost the business any more to get the sales team using it as well. Okay, great. Let's have a look at the other question here. So thank you for your feedback. It's reassuring to hear from others that are facing similar challenges. I've only just come across this series. Is there a way to watch the previous sessions on demand or catch up on any recordings? Yes, absolutely are. So we run these webinars probably about every 2 weeks. So if that's kind of interest to you, follow us on Eventbrite, but you can also check out our website for previous webinars. So just head over to webbox.digital, go to the Insights section and then webinars, and you'll see all of our previous webinars there, and you can catch up as you please. All right. Great. Thank you ever so much. Really appreciate all of those questions. Thank you for getting involved. If there are questions afterwards, please feel free to drop me a message. I'm really happy to help in any way I can. Also, if you're here and you're currently doing CPD, then you can scan this QR code just to log that training today. And just as a reminder, if you do want to arrange a call with me, like a discovery call to kind of help us help you to make sure all of your tracking is in place, then please feel free to do that. I'd love to meet you properly, but for now I just want to say a massive thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.